Hi guys, in this video lecture we are going to be talking about ancient Egypt. The objectives and techniques for this lesson are the following. We are going to identify the characteristics of monarchies and theocracies by studying ancient Egypt. We will also describe the role of women, children, and families in the civilization, and we will also identify the origin and diffusion of some of the ideas in math, science, and technology that evolved from Egypt. By the time that you are finished, you will have analyzed and interpreted some primary sources from ancient Egypt. Alright, so first we'll talk about ancient Egypt's geography. This civilization was located in northeast Africa, and if you refer to the maps that I gave you in the last lesson, you'll find it here in this area west of Mesopotamia. The Nile River was very important to this civilization. The Nile, if you remember from geography, is the longest river in the world, and this is very important for the Egyptians because the river floods annually. It provides fertile soil. When the flood waters recede, they deposit a lot of minerals in the soil, and so the soil becomes great for agriculture. So farming was something that the ancient Egyptians depended on. They had a very long growing season, so they could grow a lot of food. They had access to fresh water from the river, and they could produce a lot of food for their people. Ancient Egyptians were polytheistic. They worshipped over 2,000 different gods, and they were also very superstitious. They believed that there was an afterlife, and in order to get to the afterlife, there was a certain ritual that needed to be performed with the body upon death, and that is what mummification is all about. I'm going to attach a video to this lecture about the process of mummification, so you can learn a little bit about how that happened. Through this process, the body was preserved after death, and the bodies were then buried together with their luxuries and other goods that the deceased might need for the afterlife. This is something that was reserved for people from higher classes because it was an expensive process. So the pharaohs, those ruling classes, they were the ones who were buried in these tombs. Ancient Egyptians made a lot of advances in medicine and math and science. They were the first to develop surgery. As far as their architecture is concerned, they have the most magnificent architecture in the world at the time. They were building huge pyramids, palaces and temples, very intricate, and they were mathematically precise. They were decorated with paintings and sculptures. They used a system of hieroglyphics for writing and communication, which are symbols and pictures that were used to tell stories. And in geometry and astronomy, they also made great advances. They used geometry, of course, for building all of their pyramids and other buildings. And astronomy was also used to develop the 365-day calendar that is very similar to the one that we use today. The Egyptians had a monarch as their ruler. A monarchy is a ruling family. Sometimes they're called dynasties. And so this is where political power was passed down from one ruler to another. In order to become the king of Egypt, you would have to have been born into the right family. The king was called a pharaoh, and they were an absolute ruler. They made all of the decisions, they owned all of the land, they commanded the army, and also made all of the laws. In this culture, the pharaoh was also considered to be part god. The Egyptian economy was based on trade. The merchants were a very highly respected class because they brought a lot of luxury to the civilization. There were specialized jobs for different people. There were people who could read and write, and those were the scribes. They often worked in the government. You also had craftsmen and artists. Jobs were passed down from father to son. And the only job that anyone could do was the army. Anyone could be a soldier. They didn't have to be born into that class. This is a picture of the social structure in ancient Egypt. As you can see, at the top you have the pharaoh. Beneath him there are government officials. The army is also a very important class, so you see them beneath the government officials. Scribes are people who could read and write. This is your educated people. And then you have your merchants. Like I mentioned, they were pretty high up on the social pyramid. The artisans are people who have some sort of talent. They can make sculptures, they can weave cloth, they can make pottery. And then beneath them you have farmers, the people who grow the food. And at the bottom you have slaves. Usually these were people who were captured in war and forced into labor. Right, and that brings us to the journal entry for this lesson. I want you to think about Mesopotamian civilization and identify one way in which Egypt and Mesopotamia was the one way in which they were similar and one way in which they were different. And do remember that your journal entries have to be about 5 to 6 sentences long. Okay, so thank you, and we'll see you in class.